We've been studying Hebrews chapter 3 for several weeks. I've had a lot to say about it. I've learned a lot. I appreciate the input from class members that have added things to the class. I want to read verses 16 through 19 and then make a comment about it. One thing I would like to note in verse 15, the word today is used. When we came across that, we read that, and I didn't say much about today. And the reason being, we're going to tie that point together in verse 7 of chapter 4. And when I think about today, and maybe you can think about it, the idea of today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. If you would, be thinking about today representing an opportunity, a chance. You know, because we're not promised tomorrow. But while we experience today, while we experience the present, there are choices we make, as did those whom we're talking about, those who died in the wilderness. There was a day when they made a choice. It was a detrimental choice. But I think about choices and I think about opportunities when I read that verse 15. Verse 16, for who, and this is referencing those who fell in the wilderness, the children of Israel who had been rescued from Egyptian bondage by the hand of God through Moses, for who, having heard, rebelled. They heard God's voice. They heard they understood what he was saying, what he intended for them to do, and they rebelled. For who, having heard, rebelled, indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt, led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. These are the Egyptian slaves, the tribes that we know went down as just a few, and they came out a great people, a great nation. Item number K, written by the author of our book, says, verse 16 through 19 compose a series of questions still considering the Israelites in the wilderness as they failed to enter the promised land under their apostle Moses. What purpose is served by this series of questions? Or what lessons can be learned or hammered home, as our author would say it? My answer to the question, what lessons did we learn from chapter 3 and its summation in verses 16 through 19? What I learned was an honest assessment of the status of our hearts. We've talked, I think, maybe not extensively, but to a good degree, about how our belief system originates in our hearts. It originates in our minds. And I suggested that the heart goes first. I realized in prepping for this week's lesson that I actually misquoted. There are two verses that I wanted to use about the heart. They both come from the proverb writer. And originally we had looked at Proverbs 4:23. And I said that the heart goes first. We're going to re-examine both of those Proverbs passages here in when we get into chapter 4, but I wanted to make mention of that. For as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And also about the heart, I'm paraphrasing, from out of the heart are the issues of life. It's where our belief system is rooted. So this unbelief that we see in verse 19, it came from their hearts. I tried to stress the point that when God delivered them through the plagues, and when he led them by a cloud or a pillar by day and by a pillar of fire by night, they could see those physical manifestations of God's presence. They saw his deliverance, and still they had unbelieving hearts, evil hearts of unbelief. So what I learned was that a true assessment, an honest assessment of the status of our hearts, what we currently believe, is what's important. What it should warrant after this honest assessment of our hearts is a rededication to a God-first decision-making process, starting with our thoughts and then letting that manifest in our actions. I think I offered a scenario. Do you, or I question myself, did I believe that every single person had disbelief? Were there some that might have thought because of what they saw that they could take it, but they were fearful and unbelieving because they wouldn't act upon it? And I think we try to entertain the idea of pressure and peer pressure, and sometimes we condemn ourselves because by the way things we allow, the things we allow to happen, or the times we should speak and we're cowardly. We don't speak up. So a reassessment of our hearts, a reassessment, is that really what I believe? And how come I didn't speak up? Those are dangers, ever-present dangers, as we live and move in our neighborhoods, our workplaces, and our communities. Let's not be cowardly. We need to be peaceable people. We need to get along with people, but we don't need to compromise. Some verses that maybe don't apply directly to this, but think about the theme of the book and who's the recipient. The initial recipient of this book are Jewish Christians. If they reject Judaism and they believe in Christ and they submit to the plan of salvation, they believe, they hear, they believe, they repent, they confess, they submit to baptism. Their belief system is something new if they go back to Judaism. Isn't that like Proverbs 26:4, a dog returning to its vomit? Or 2 Peter 2, verse 22, a sow having been washed, returning to the mire? Maybe it's not a direct correlation for you, but in my mind, that's what I think about these people who saw what they saw and then they don't believe. It's an indictment of me when I'm not brave enough, or I'm not grounded enough, and I let other things impact my decision-making process, and let it impact my heart rather than what I know is true. Certainly much more we could say, but if there are any other comments about chapter 3 before we move on. Chapter 4 starts with therefore. We've discussed that at length. It's because of what was just said. Now our author of the Hebrew letter starts with therefore. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short. The idea of coming short here, I think, can be summed up like the analogy Paul used about the race. If we consider all of us in the race, if you come short, you're not in first place. I know that's rudimentary. It's pretty simple, but the idea of coming short is not winning that race. The thing about the race that we're all in is I'm not competing against Reuben nor Rex, and none of you compete against me. There's enough prizes to go around, but we all have to make sure that we don't come short of the standard of what God expects of us. There's not a different standard for me than you. All of mankind has the same standard. It's God's standard. And what we're being encouraged in this first verse is, therefore, in light of what we studied, in light of the example of unbelief of the people that was referenced, we studied about, let's make sure that we win our race. It's a personal race. It's a race that we have to win because of what's at stake. It's present tense. The one thing that could change the tense of this would be our passing, our demise. As long as there's life, there's an opportunity to not fall short. I think maybe there's two elements there. I think we need to be cognitively responsible. We have to be able to understand the gospel plan. When we hear it and we understand it, I think that would be a qualification there. And we need to be alive. Once we pass from this life, I would suggest that our position in our personal race is established. We'll talk more about it, but there's no work or knowledge or device in the grave. Life ending is what determines this opportunity, if you will. Therefore, since the promise remains of entering his rest, in my version that's capitalized, it's deity there. The rest offered, the rest sponsored, the rest planned belongs to God. It's his rest, but he offers us an opportunity, a chance. It's there, it's attainable. But there's a warning built here. I think we said for a couple of weeks that much of this Hebrew letter is cautionary. It's a warning to us to be sure that we don't come short so that we can enter his, God's rest. There's at least two, most likely three different types of rest considered in the scripture. There's a rest that is cessation from work, cessation from labor. There's another rest that would be a release from toil, from suffering, from bondage. And then for the purposes of our study, I think the most important rest, the one that's largely emphasized, is that heavenly rest, eternal rest, that reward for the righteous, for the faithful. So if you can get that kind of in your mind, there's a cessation from work, there's the experience, the passing away of labor and toil, and then there's a heavenly rest. This theme, if we could say that chapter 4 goes into another theme, it's that the heavenly rest, the eternal rest, as described here as his rest, the rest sponsored by, initiated by, provided by governed by God, that's heavenly. That's the eternal rest. And it's superior to rest that we might receive on earth. We know that God rested from his labors in the time of creation. But it took me a while to understand, and this sounds simple, but God wasn't tired. That's not why he rested. Creation, and I think we've established that we're all creationists. We believe in the 6 days of creation. But when God rested on the seventh day, it wasn't because he was tired. It's because he was done. Now, when we take rest from our labors, it could be both of those reasons, but it could be some other reasons. We might be hindered and therefore we rest. We might be finished and rest. We might run out of time. We might run out of money, the resources to accomplish a goal. But for God and the rest he took, when he ceased from his labors, when he ceased from the work of his hand, it wasn't because of weariness. It was because he was finished. Our note on page 23 says, keep in mind the progression of thought. And this goes back to chapter 1. Angels gave the law to Israel through Moses. Christ is superior to angels. And hence his word is to be heeded more. And that's referencing chapter 2. Christ's word needs to be heeded as more important and superimposed over the word of angels. He's the Son, their servants. Moses was sent, our author says here, as an apostle in chapter 3 to rescue Israel from Egyptian bondage. Christ was sent to rescue humanity from sin. However, Christ is superior to Moses by so much as that he built a house that has more honor than the house Moses built. Moses preached good news to Israel about the promised land, yet Israel hardened their hearts. That was the end of chapter 3. And were not able to enter due to their disbelief and disobedience. The promised land was a type of rest. I think in our Sunday morning study, Reuben has pictured it well that there are foreshadowings in the scripture. I see them kind of as examples, like forerunners. The type of rest that's discussed regarding the promised land is a foreshadowing of heavenly rest. The Israelites could have entered, if they were obedient, into a type of rest that foreshadows the heavenly rest. So these examples, these foreshadowings, we can learn lessons and we can be able to apply those to our lives, application to our lives, to make sure we don't have that same problem, that challenge, that sin enter us and our hearts. The promised land was a type of rest. Now in chapter 4, the chief point is that the rest Jesus Christ promises in heaven is superior to the rest that Israel was promised in the land of Canaan. Yet, just as physical Israel did not enter into that rest, Christians must give diligence to enter that rest, that no man fall after the same example of disobedience. So, the warning, that's what the therefore is about. This chapter starts Therefore, in light of what we studied, there still remains an opportunity of entering his rest, lest us fear any of you seem to have come short of it. Fear can work a lot of good in our lives if we allow it in its proper place. Proverbs chapter 1 is probably familiar to most of you. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. The proverb of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man, knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. I would suggest that fear, properly placed, can have a positive impact on our faith. I was surprised to read something earlier. You know, when you go to Wikipedia, I don't think that I'm going to see much about the church when I go there. But here's an example. A fear-motivated faith, and I think that's what I'm trying to suggest. If we have a proper fear and awe of God, it can assist our faith. A fear-motivated faith is when someone's belief or actions are driven by fear of consequences rather than genuine trust or love. As an example, is a person who goes to church primarily out of fear of divine punishment rather than a desire for spiritual connection. Another example is someone who avoids certain behaviors, not because they believe they are wrong, but because they fear social repercussions. What I'm suggesting, if we have a proper fear, that can be a motivating factor in the beginning of our faith. I should have printed this off. There's an article, and I can't find it right now. It was talking about a Church of Christ preacher who advocates a fear-motivated faith as being part of a genuine faith. And I tried to think of how we can right-side that and how we can make that all balance. And I thought about several scriptures, like work out your salvation with fear and trembling. When you're introduced to the gospel and you're, say, a foreigner to it, you don't understand it, and you begin to read and understand, and faith is built in your heart, your belief system starts, you understand there's a reward, but you also understand on the other side there's a punishment. And I think there's a way they can go hand in hand, that a fear-motivated faith can be beneficial. Hebrews, in this letter, in chapter 10, in verse 27, Verse 26, for if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation which will devour the adversaries. What are some of the reasons faithful Christians stay on path? They stay on their journey. They're not easily sidetracked. They don't fall away. I would argue verse 27 is this certain fearful expectation of judgment, and that can be a motivating factor. Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, and we're talking about the obedient Christian, stay in the course, not being sidetracked, not being overtaken to the extent that they fall away or that they put themselves in severe jeopardy. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Fear, a fear-motivated faith, if you want to call it that, can be beneficial in its proper place. This verse has always resonated with me. It's the idea where the Philippian writer's not there. He had confidence in them. And he declared, you always obeyed in my presence. And then he says, and in my absence. Isn't that what we do in our lives? You know, we get up, we prepare to start our day, and a lot of times that might be us away from our spouse, away from our family, away from our home. Our lives are centered, and we go out into the world, normally alone. I see Lee several times a week, and we're driving in our vehicles, and he's by himself, and I'm by myself, and we're going out in the world. Isn't this, we're absent from our whole support system, but we have what we believe in our heart. And part of what motivates us to go out and do the right thing every day, even away from our support system, is partly fear, a fear-motivated faith, but then a faith that we're looking forward to the promise and the reward. So fear can bring the beginning of knowledge. Fear can help us work out our salvation. We do that to obtain or attain the promise. A promise is a declaration of assurance. The rest that's under consideration, this heavenly rest, is there any of us who don't believe God can deliver what he promised? It's deliverable. It's attainable. But we have a part to play. What's the most grand thing in this life? It's at Disney World. And I'm thinking like something you can set your sights on in this world. Do you work hard for something that's not attainable? If you can't go to Disney World, you can't fly, you've got a phobia, and you can't afford the ticket. You can't drive because your car won't make it there, and you're afraid to travel alone. It might not be attainable to you. But Disney World, if that's what you have your sights set on, it's attainable. if you can muster everything necessary to get there. Jesus told us a lot about the other world, about the heavenly city. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. We've been told about it. We believe it's there. The promise of reward, this declaration of assurance. We believe it's there. That's our faith. The expectation that I might not be able to attain it can help motivate us. If I don't attain it, it'll be my choosing because it's attainable. What would Disney World be without any visitors? Be imaginative. It wouldn't be realistic. If they built this magic kingdom and they had no gates for entrance, who would pursue it? What we've been promised in this rest, this heavenly city, it's really there. And it's really attainable for the righteous. It's a personal race that we all must enter and strive to be in with a fear-motivated faith. I'm sorry I couldn't find that article. I'm going to find it and maybe get Shane or somebody to help me print it and post it. But it was kind of a knock on the idea that fear mixed with our faith can be a motivating factor. But the Bible has a lot to say about fear. So for verse 1 of chapter 4, any comments before we move on? Therefore, since the promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. Their faith was not strong enough to motivate them to obey. They had fear, but it was misappropriated. Remember one of the spies? We're grasshoppers in their sight. We can't take the land. They were fearful, but it was misappropriated. I thought about some of Israel's battles after this. And some of their foes. They had a lot of foes. They had problems with the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Philistines, the Moabites, the Amalekites, and the list goes on. Did they overcome any of those struggles because of themselves? No. It was a faith that was obedient to God's command. I think about the battle of Ai, the first battle of Ai, and there was sin in the camp. Joshua 7 and Joshua 8 talks about those two battles. 3,000 went against the men of Ai in the first battle, and they were whipped. They got whipped and run off. 36 people of the tribe of Israel died. The second battle depicted the victory in Joshua 8:25. None of the people of Ai survived. 12,000 were killed. 1 Samuel 18, chapter 7, or verse 7, talks about the song that the women would sing about Saul having killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. I looked, not extensively. I don't think it would serve the purpose. I think most of you realize the battles Israel fought and the number they slew was huge when they believed and they followed the process. They followed God's plan. The times they didn't, they were defeated. Remember, they lost the ark, and it stayed in the land of the Philistines for a while. God used that and proved he was the true God. They had an idol that would fall down on his face in presence of the ark. But let me offer this thought. Their fear came when they would not go into the land. And essentially what they were promised, they were going to be given this land, but they had to take it. They were going to eat from vineyards they hadn't planted and trees they hadn't planted. They were going to live in houses they hadn't built. They were going to be able to take possession of the land, the houses, the vineyards, whatever crop was in the field and not destroyed. It was theirs, but they had to work for it. Compare that thought with the Disneyland. This was realistically offered to them by the God of heaven that led them out, and they would not believe him. Reuben's been working hard, and his family, they've been working hard starting to build a house. If Reuben could have and Holly could have their ideal house, the one they're building now, if they could have that house plan painted in that color, landscaped the way they wanted to, and all they had to do is just walk over and move in it, I imagine they'd take it, because it's pretty hot out there. Something's required of God's people that are going to be faithful. You got to get to work. Do your part. Remember, it starts with the heart. Believe God and let that be manifest in your actions. The rest for us is offered every day that we draw breath. We're alive, and the Lord has not returned. Therefore, the promise remains for us. Just like these Hebrew Christians. We have to do our part. So we can apply this to ourselves. Therefore, since a promise of rest remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of us seem to have come short of it. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as them, but the word which they heard did not profit them. Why? They didn't get it. Not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. For we who have believed, verse 3, do enter that rest as he has said, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. I think verse 3 here in the part, that's where we get introduced to the types of rest. God rested from his labors, and it was finished. We've identified that. But there's a rest being offered to them, which he called my rest, in the land of Canaan, and that rest offered to us is the eternal rest in heaven. Verse 4, for he has spoken in a certain place of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this place, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains that some must enter it, and those to whom it was first preached did not enter because of disobedience, again he designates a certain day, saying, today. It's present tense. It's like the invitation. Every time it's offered. So what do we sing sometimes? All things are ready. The opportunity, the chance, the invitation to enter God's rest is present every day that we live and breathe, and we have the cognitive ability to think straight. And I'm thinking about somebody specific when I say that. This is a little bit of a segue. John Kennemer had a son who had a severe brain injury before I ever met him. Many people, I think you would know Tim Kennemer, and he passed. When I first met the Garys and Mary and I were dating and got married, I experienced Tim Kennemer, and I had never knew him or his family at all before his injury, and he was stuck in the present. Sister Gary would watch him if John had something to do, and he was always trying to get to the telephone, trying to dial his girlfriend the day that he got injured. He was stuck on that day. He would ask Sonny, Daddy, where are we? We're in Albemarle, Alabama. And 10 seconds later, he said, Daddy, where are we? He was stuck in that day. And I'm setting that up to talk about cognitive abilities, our ability to understand. And we use that reasoning to say, well, there's young children, they're not accountable, so they're not in danger of punishment or condemnation. When I learned and experienced Tim Kennemer, it was told me that he can't learn anything new. He's just stuck in that day. Severe brain injury. But he obeyed the gospel after that injury. And he overheard, and I hope I don't get the story wrong, he overheard some brethren talking about needing to hear, believe, and follow the gospel plan for salvation. And he said, I want to be baptized. And I think it just took Sonny, Brother John, and Brother Gary off by surprise, and he was baptized. He was cognitive at some point that he heard them talking and realized he needed to submit to baptism. I had a personal experience with Tim Kennemer. Mary and I had been married a couple years, and he didn't know me. And I went to Sister Gary's one day. He walked up to me and got real close to me and looked me dead in the eye, and he said, Tim Davis. And it was always said he was stuck in that day, years back. He's never going anyplace. But he called my name. For 5 seconds, he knew who I was. He was cognitive. While we have life, while we have breath, if our cognitive abilities will let us understand the plan of salvation, let's be obedient. Let's not be disobedient, because today is what we have. Today is the promise is offered, and there's no guarantee of tomorrow. Thank you for your time.